I make episodes on acts with more than 2 albums to rank, but sometimes it doesn't feel like I've put in enough detail or enthusiasm to call it a full video with the band name as the title. Maybe that describes my sub 4 minute videos thus far, but rather than make any more, I've been letting myself record it, then saving them up to spew them at you here. The debut EP shows an already honed punk pop songwriter ready to document not quite our millennial wasteland, but the gems you can find among it. This is such a solidly impressive 5 songs that it's going to really invoke the EP paradox of this show, and post-production me will have to figure that out. But it's relatable, solid, and impressive. When that goes full length, admittedly the kind of punk pop full length where only 10 tracks are offered at a time, there's a first half that follows up and cashes in on that same promise, and a second half that tries a few new things. But these more trad songwriting attempts and reaches for more epic vistas don't quite work on me. I feel she's got the thing that she's best at, and it's a good idea to try a few other things, but she's not quite on the same par with those at this point. Why am I so flushed out? I need to sort out my white balance settings. A better balance is struck on the second album, balanced out by more dreamy pop vibes. And this time that matches up, and the grunge rage of Misery Guts is something we ought to hear more of from Alex. Put this digital EP underneath old versions and they're not interesting. I didn't yet get into the new one. Maybe it's because I like those betweeny singles and they're not on it, and I want her to switch it up a bit, and the CD was expensive, then there was an expanded version, and just pretend I filmed this bit before it came out. You can't prove when I filmed it, unless you consider when my hair was like that. This is a band with a lot more releases than this, actually. They've been going for 15 years or more. Can you imagine? That's meant to be a reference for me doing music for 15 years or more. Thing is, their discography is complex. Those earlier things, I think I just literally can't find them. I'm giving in. I'm recording this in early August 2023, and I don't intend to publish this for a while because it's going to be in a compilation video, but if nothing's changed by then in the availability of the other stuff, then I'm approaching the Last Internationale based on their 3 major label albums. Thus far, I expect they have a lot more in them. They just blaze with creative and revolutionary energy. I think of these 3, this is least demonstrated on the first one. Despite being a long time into their career, it still has debut-itis. It's got an absolutely killer first track, and then the rest of them are a bit too trad blues for my liking. They just seem to do the obvious moves. I did get into this band because of that initial single, and then got the album and thought, they've not really matched up to it. However, I saw them live this year, and they played quite a few of these tracks, and they really stand up live. I don't think it's exactly that they've lost something in the studio, maybe it's just what they add live. They do a lot of extending songs out, and they earn it. Now, it's when the second-ish one came out that I realized these guys are fucking serious. Maybe the title of this one already reveals this, but it is epically soulful music. I don't even know what a soul is, but this has it. This is just a blues rock maximum. They are still doing things within a trad genre, but they're revolutionizing it because they're revolutionaries. That passion just burninates throughout this album, and you can tell that as much as they obviously love social justice, they equally love music, and that comes through in the care and execution. And yet it's still fucking wild. This is one of those sounds where even the vocals are distorted throughout most of it, and that actually works in this one. The riffs are a lot better now. This actually shows that blues rock still has some creativity in it in the 21st century. One more thus far, and it continues the winning streak without being as thoroughly impressive. This is still a high standard, and they get more creative with it. They see which different things they can do. It's not that they've not matched up, they've just chosen to have a bit more variety, which kind of comes with taking themselves a bit less seriously, which results in a less essential, if more fun, sequel. It's a perfectly apt follow-up, but it does have to go underneath. Maybe because it is a perfectly apt follow-up. Let me strongly advocate their live show. These two are a power duo. What they do is at the top of each of their games. And yeah, there are other musicians with them and they match up, but this is essential talent for the 21st century that happens to be delivered in quite a 20th century vibe, but proves that that vibe still has more to it. For a band so righteous, they've got moments of brain fart, but it's barely worth a pause. A band that lasted an appropriate amount of time are one that should have been celebrated alongside the rest of the grunge wave. They're from Seattle, but kinda missed out, maybe because we allow women fewer opportunities. There was already a woman in a band, so that was enough. Kinda resultantly, their sound is on a go slow. Each of these would have been an impressive album for 2 years earlier than they actually came out, so if you just knock 2 off the year thing above, then you can be impressed by this. Starting in the era when grunge actually referred to the, thickness and darkness of the sound. This is one of those compilations of single and EP tracks, but it's album length. It's very much intended as their debut album. All of their rage is there, they're just not yet bothering with song structure. Sometimes you don't need to. Women in bands do face some extra obstacles that men in bands don't always face. The sense of purpose here gives the album a lot more solidity than that first one, which, wasn't exactly composed as an album. So that's a horrible silver lining for 2 musicians' deaths. These were the kind of things that they were already aptly angry about, prescient. But as you follow this career, the music improves. That's also true of the last one. This shows that there was a lot more in them as a band. They're finally ready for MTV without having sanded anything off. It's just a structural integrity that was necessary for a band to last any longer than this. They didn't. This one's a bit of a misadventure, but only just, because I hella dig the middle Lillix album. I thought, yeah, I dig this enough that why haven't I checked out the others? So I went in blind, went in deaf, and they start out kinda how they look. Canadian teenagers in a very slightly post-Avril era. I'm not desperate to make that link, but they've got the same writing team on here. The Matrix wrote them a single, and it's crap. There's another track that the Matrix contributed to, and that's good. The end result of this is as gawky as they look, really, but only as a result of them being a rock band who are being reined into a pop sensibility. The harmonies just feel like plasterwork. Linda Perry contributes to this. I know Linda Perry did write some of the best songs, but she wrote a lot of the worst songs. It's the parts where they're least affected by studio and management interference, and the rock band can actually shine through that this really works. But still, their identity is obscured by the marketing mission. It's as gawky as they look, ultimately. Just a related thought, not gawky at all, and not Canadian, and I would happily find the rest of this discography, I just haven't done so yet. But I remember the post-Avril era where Amy Stutch was marketed that way. But she's so purely the real deal. This is a teenager who writes her own stuff and makes it fucking commanding all the way through. The singles are amazing, but the album tracks stand up too. Amy's work should really be more celebrated, but most partially up to me. I should go listen to the rest of it and celebrate it. Hopefully she can be appreciated outside of an Avril-related segue. See, this is the bit of Lillix that really fucking works. We find them in the Block Party era, taking on that kind of sound and making it theirs. But also, this is one of those times where I can bring up Weezer as a comparison, and maybe I do that too much because my comparison version of Weezer is an ideal they only very briefly managed to nail, but a lot of the strengths of Pinkerton are visible here, with better voices. Here, Lillix are actually realized, maybe because they're mature enough to be their own leaders now. This is a singularly great little album. Then yeah, one more, and I picked up the Japanese edition because it's got some bonus tracks, and again, there's some clues there. There's only 2 of them left, and the high And the high exposure on these photographs maybe also describes the music here. They shouldn't have done another holo, and they've gone toward a more pop sound that they actually own this time. And it's got its moments, but there's just less of it. Literally in the amount of content, there's fewer of them and less of them. And it's the idea of them as a band fading out without much to remind you of their peaks. But still bits. I'm not getting rid of either of these. Here's a full, awesome and relevant band making a full, awesome and relevant album. And beneath that, there's the one where they were reined in a bit too much. And beneath that, there's the one where they couldn't afford to make something as good. And halfway lost interest in doing so, but only halfway. Amy, though, so underappreciated. I'm not quite up to the task of ranking letters to Cleo. Maybe I'm intimidated that my opinion's wrong. Here's my opinion. They had 3 albums and a sister release that actually compiles what's before the albums. And I think in total this is a more interesting set than this. Are you gonna boo me? Still a solid debut, and it goes forward and it keeps going forward to more overtly pop-punk stuff. Punk pop? They started out with this quite chatty style because Kay wasn't yet as much of a musician as the rest of the band, but I like the sound of her catching up. This has some of the best American punk pop from before it could get called emo, and that's for the better. Really tasty. The others also have good bits. Inevitable special mention for the Josie and the Pussycats movie soundtrack, because same vocalist as this, and they made some really good songs for it. Maybe not quite a full album's worth, but still a set of impressive singles. Strangelove are mainly remembered as a band who were the support act to Britpop bands. I think that oversimplifies what they were doing. It wasn't imitative of the contemporary bands. They had their own vibe. There's a poetic gloom to it. If I say it's Baroque and then I look at what Baroque means, it might count as that. That's sure true on a debut album with a very scary title and cover. But at this point, the majority of these songs don't have a lot of structure. If it's evocative, it's still impressionistic because it's just not catchy enough. It kinda could have done with some editing, like creative editing to get it into focus. Some of the songs are a bit overlong. This is music that they quite soon outclassed, because what they were lacking is hooks, and they put them all together here. Now I know some of my viewers got to me via Suede-related stuff, and this is directly Suede-related. You've got Brett and a bit of Richard on backing vocals. That's just an additional ornament, really. The album stands great by itself. It doesn't lack for the baroqueness either, baroquicity. It's just got more of a unified theme. It's a well-made album. With the doom of a closing of a millennium, they can even put that atop some really Sonny Smith singles and still carry that vibe. And they do that very well, but it still culminates in a long song about throwing your life into a sea of black. Aspirational stuff. And then they found a means of combining both elements, just bringing it darker again, but not compromising on the pop. End with the self-title. That's how it works, right? It is kind of the two things they're good at are piled together. In each song, you get this stroppy stomping that just happens to be well-written and catchy. From the other perspective, you get this pop song that just happens to have more depth and darkness to it. So that's very welcome, and their second essential album, and last. If there was some kind of B-sides compilation, I'm not counting it. iTunes only release, that ain't a CD. That's not really been my standard before, but just giving something a name doesn't make it a release. Patrick has his solo works, maybe other band members have their solo works. This is just going in the compilation video, so that's enough. Silverchair's in there, and I can quickly whip through this. No, I can't come up with an excuse for this to be in a CD collection rather than a charity shop. Yeah, I'm not interested in early Silverchair, and I picked it up on a whim, and it wasn't a justified whim. The band themselves know this, and it's kind of relatable. I was also in a rock band as a teenager, and we weren't ready to have a major label. Neither of these guys is so directly imitative, specifically of Pearl Jam, but of a few other things that were around at the time. This isn't staying here, it's more of a Frog Swamp. Then the one I've not got a CD copy of, but I can superimpose it. But only for that that long. I've put this on a few times because I do have faith in Silverchair, but not anything that's justified this early. At least on Freak Show they're finding some riffs they're not directly trying to imitate, but they can still irritate. The couple of songs in which there's a lot of external instrumentation piled atop their song just demonstrates how sloppy the central band is. Though Daniel's found his screaming that gets put to some use, his main means of vocalizing at this point in that whine where every note is sustained too long don't impress me much, but it's still a step up. Now, this is the reason I did this video. Yeah, I'm not interested in what's before it. I've tried to be interested in what's before it, but I'm so interested in this. Their musicianship tightened so absolutely. They are titans at this point. By trying some more things, by finally having something specific about their angst, they become a fully relevant band. Maybe in 99 no one wanted any more grunge, but I still do, and I want specifically this. It's got such a vitality and grit to it. Then a more famous one that goes a little technicolor. When I first heard this, I was quite thoroughly put off from it by how it contrasts with that prior one. It's such an awkward mix of songwriting and instrumentation. It's full of decoration. It's got this sound that ought to feel huge, but maybe doesn't fully manage it. He's placed his voice way up there. I don't know what he's on about with polystyrene hats. There's only small moments that have anything in common with the history of Silverchair here. Only little bits that are grungy or riffy. It's kind of all about orchestration, but with a few more listens I've gotten used to it, and I can recognize the genius people are on about, but it ain't gonna match up to the ballroom. And then one more oddity, via trying to keep it simple and be kind of mainstream. This sounds a bit like any chart rock song in the 16 years since. But there's also the crazy single If You Keep Losing Sleep, and a vibe that I'm pretty sure they've heard early Panic at the Disco. It had to be early at this point. So imagine that, but actually quite good. There's ways in which I prefer what they're doing on here to Diorama, but it's just not quite as full a product, so that's a pretty obvious stack. I know people will disagree about the ballroom, but I'm right, because this show is about predicting how I like things, and that's how I like them. But by throwing this into the compilation episode, I don't have to listen to his odd other albums or do any further research on them. Basically, I'm into them for these three, specifically this one. Let me point you to a very powerful post-grunge record. Staying in the silver, here's a band for which you might see the phrase cult status or whatever, with an L. There is an earlier release that I've not yet bothered to get. Maybe that's why this can't count as a distinct video, but then this one goes first. Now, British rock didn't have much to show for it at the time, except for this absolute explosion of a band. I don't remember their live shows that well, actually. Maybe I was on too many drugs. But you can see how they earned their fan base by listening to this. It's a lot more radical music than anything that was accepted in the mainstream palette at the time, which might explain why they didn't last, but they definitely last for the duration of this. Second album has more on it and some really good ideas on it, and yet, to my instincts, it just really doesn't stand. I think it's the way they've recorded it. No matter what volume, what speakers, what headphones, it just sounds kind of distant. I think it would go on the underside either way, but the production absolutely cements it. Both to upside down. And then you can follow just the singer into a very different genre and a different continent. The sound of Ruby can easily be filed into that word trip-hop, a genre that seems to mean badly written song sung by a woman and it sounds like it's underwater. But you don't really lament that, because if it were any clearer, you'd hear more how badly written it is. It's a genre that turned up 20 years too soon to be the tedious background music to YouTube videos, but now it's found its place. And in era, maybe that describes Saltpeter, but what she brings as a vocalist who used to be in the punkest punk band is the front fundamental obnoxiousness of punk, and that brings this genre an actual personality. And I don't know, there's something cheaper about the sound that these elements together, to my definition, put it much closer to the field of electro-clash, which maybe hadn't yet found its definition at the time. And that's a very welcome sound for most of this. I think it just doesn't quite stick out the full duration. And then they do go kind of trip-hop. Maybe they've listened too much to what other people were doing and tried to imitate that rather than just make what they were doing. Because the sound of this is so loop-based and muted, which is also a reasonable way to listen to this. Yeah, it's got some moments, but not many. Then if I'm really doing this... Leslie restored the name Ruby as a solo project, and I forgot that happened. Move on. This one's a tough sell. If I say that this is self-consciously quirky American ooey's indie with a band partly composed of session musicians, whose singer then went on to be separately more celebrated for... Oh, you're gonna have to go and look up what he was more celebrated for. Don't worry, it's music. It still just about counts as music. But really, in the regard of the time, Ima Robot were really onto something. I think there's even an argument, if I was calling this a full video in itself, that there was a pre-first album's worth of material. And it really shows a uniquely innovative band. And then move on to this, a frantic debut of punk songs. The manic pixie energy of it really carries you through every corner, to the extent that it feels like just a straight line of bullet train. It's music with a very excited energy, and that carries them through. It allows them to perform such silliness in a way that's so engaging you can take it seriously. Then I kind of remember some disappointment in how musically obvious their follow-up was, becoming major label alt-rock instead of offering more of these 2-minute slices. Except more of this wouldn't really have had a point. And this eventually grew on me, I mean like 15 years ago, because it applies their same philosophy to just some more developed songs. There's a surprising depth to those songs that go past 4 minutes, and there's a load of infectious fun to the ones that don't. The prophetic rock star that Alex imagined himself as when he'd taken more drugs than he has talent does show through here. It's ridiculous and it's earned. I could never believe in anything branded as Edward Sharp, but I know that's found its own audience. Maybe I'm apologizing to my 2006 self when I put this atop their debut. And then kind of the same sensation again, because there was another album. It felt like ages later. That's actually not that big a gap for albums, is it? But it's a big gap for their sound. It was used on some TV show. I don't have to give a shit about TV shows. Okay, thanks. And I'm giving this another listen for the sake of this video, because that's what I do, because I'm your reliable reporter. But the way they've chosen to try maturing kind of happened to too many fun indie bands at the time. I can dig some chill grooves, but it's just not the right thing to do with his voice. And they don't have anything to offer within the vibe of chill grooves. Like, the good features of I'm a Robot exist atop more emphatic music than this. So this goes like that, but do find the other early stuff as well. This one's going in the compilation. Even though I like this band enough and know enough about them to make it a unique 3-album video, it's just that I never yet got into Jamie's solo work. And on the topic of compilations, there's that compilation, and I will get it, but not until it goes down to this price again. The secret third reason that I'll have to edit out is that I think my opinion of Reuben might be like the inverse of the band's opinion, and I'm sincere but kind of meek about it, but probably most of the fan base is on my side. See, there's an intro EP, don't got it, then a full blast of post-hardcore. If that's the right thing to call it, maybe that's the nearest thing to call it. Because Reuben are quite a unique sound. I think generally with his voice, or just there's something about a juxtaposition of their discipline and their medium. Maybe the lyricism, just something from some genre is thrown together with something from some other genre. If they're Helmet rip-offs, I don't know enough about Helmet. They're not Gun rip-offs. I just think you won't find this exact combination elsewhere, nor anything satisfyingly close enough. And that's very thorough thoroughly demonstrated here. So this has debut-itis in the good way. It's a debut of every great song they'd written thus far. They're relatively short songs, but every moment of their conveyance is for their message. There's something in their conversational tone, not just lyrics, but maybe also the music, what they refuse to be embarrassed by. Am I getting any closer to describing the particular appeal of Reuben? With the youthful excitement presented as a unique music, this is going up here. And then they kind of managed to do the same damn thing again. No longer with the selection box format of the debut, they had to write something new, and it's the perfect sequel because it offers up good versions of the same and a few good versions of something a bit different. The some things a bit different do bring them more toward traditional songwriting, but they're welcome there too. Instinctively, I might even prefer this one. I mean, it has Flamethrower on it, but really that debut was a bit more fast and dangerous. Then, yeah, I got meek about this because I read an interview with Jamie where he says he's proudest of this one. And I feel by drawing out the songs a bit more, they no longer hit like a bullet. And the ones that are singles, or at least the ones that are meant to be singles and kind of come across as goofy comments on social interaction and even writing songs, just aren't as good as the ones that are like that on their existing 2 albums. It's alright, they're just not bothering with hooks as much, or when they are bothering with hooks, it just feels silly rather than fun silly. Mainly listen to these 2, and then you'll feel compelled to listen to this one, and maybe you'll see what Jamie's on about. Some band names are merely a fact. Starts out with a little EP that clearly shows that they already understood what they're gonna be. And that's a 90s gloom rock all about self-hatred, but covered in more electronic aspects. Sequencers and other stuff I pretend I understand. As with any EP, its ranking is gonna be affected by its brevity. It's half an album and one of the tracks was upcycled. But it's a really good example. I like this EP as much as I hate these fucking Cupid dolls. Why? Ugh. Why are they so bloated? It goes full length and they choose a very obvious album cover. Still, the content justifies it. It's a very strong full length of what I've already shown a very strong EP of. It's just more of the best, and there's more of the best. It's like almost twice as much of the best. I think I like the works of artists who obviously are gonna die young, and in this case it wasn't even a suicide, but he may have got around to that later if he had the chance. To develop on that, they've gone further in the synthy direction. I guess 9 Inch Nails is already a big thing now, and I think it only slightly works. There's something about the general synthy sound to this that gives me a headache, and maybe that's intentional. Most things give me a headache. Bear in mind I can only listen to this while existing, and existing gives me a headache. I need to get rid of this head. But in this one, I can only justify a couple of tracks and all these drip-drop synths, no thanks. Weave into that my obsessive compulsion to listen to every second of a CD and the function of the overlong bonus track that's just there to troll us. I mean, that's obviously on me, but it's also obviously not up to their standard. They drop the ball here. And then they pick the ball back up off the floor, but it's kind of difficult to notice. Because this is God Lives Underwater refining their strength, but complications with the publishing and non-publishing of it mean that it's ended up as an obscurity, and a very particular one, as it's like they completed the recording of this album and then it got saved as 64 kilobits per second MP3s. Maybe not even MP3s. WMAs? Whatever you've got. Now, according to my very extensive research, a superior quality recording of this has been leaked online, and I should probably find that and save over my ripped MP3s with it. But I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at a version of this that they didn't manage to get the David Bowie cover onto. I mean, probably would have cost some money to get that on. It's just 10 tracks, and with a massive impediment to their listening quality. When you can squint past that, you can hear how good the songs are, and honestly, if this album turned out right, and if it had a little more on it, it could end up here. All these factors definitely put it lower, but only a little bit lower. I still really like it. Anyway, RIP to God. TV time. It's probably hackneyed to observe how fucking great this first one is. Oh well, I think the particular appeal is how they're technically within the realms of punk. punk. You can hear that on their early live material, but by the time they reached making a studio album, they had become ridiculously tight, and they developed a kind of restraint that really contrasts with what punk is meant to be, and really lends television their strength. Obviously, this is a massively influential record, and if you've not yet heard it, then you've probably heard it via all of the things it's influenced. Television are frequently praised for their guitarmanship, as if they're all about solos and virtuosity. But that is so not in an Eddie Van Halen way. I am a slow and clumsy guitarist, and I do think I'm actually quite close to being able to play television's work. It's all scales and all quite considered. It kind of sounds like a guitar lesson, but there's just a structural robustness to it that few things have matched up to, and those that have come close have done so because they are trying to be Marquee Moon, which you'd think could maybe describe the follow-up. Down, and not quite. It's just more fun with television. A more fun version of television. And by increasing the whimsy, they've increased the smiles, but they've decreased how essential it is, but on purpose. It doesn't stand a chance of matching up to this one, but it doesn't really want to. It just wants to be a bonus disc. I've not checked out all of Verlaine's solo, but what I have heard sounds quite similar to this reunion album. And I do mean that kind of for the worse. The comments I've found about this often refer to it as a hidden gem, surprisingly good because it's a 90s version of television. It's not that it underperforms, it just doesn't impress. I think it's observable that the rhythm section aren't really trying, by which I mean the rhythm and bass section, the drum and bass section. So in overall creative content, it doesn't really distinguish enough from a solo career, and it doesn't compare to 70s television. But it doesn't need to, and it's still alright. Half an hour is enough, isn't it? Some might say too much.